All right, welcome to the Countless Vlogcast, episode 44, with my guest, J.D.Cunegan. How are you today, Jeff?
Doing well. How are you?
So tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a self-published author. I write under the pen name J.D.Cunegan. It's Cunegan. It's my first and middle initials of my given name and the Scottish root of my surname. I published my first book, Bounty, in 2015. That's the first book in the Jill Andersen series, which is a combination murder mystery and superhero series. I've had readers compare it to everything from Law and Order and Castle and Daredevil and things like that. So I just released the fifth book in that series, Betrayal, back in April. And I'm also the author of the contemporary fantasy book, NOTNA. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, so what got you into writing and publishing books?
I discovered comic books when I was in middle school, around 11, 12 years old. And when I was in middle school and high school, I started creating my own characters. I was originally supposed to be was going to be a comic book writer, comic book artist. The books that are out now were originally supposed to be comic books. But when I went to college, to study art. And that's when I realized that studying art and being an artist were two completely different things. And I lost track of my art, but I kept writing. And slowly but surely into adulthood, I started getting good enough to the point where I could actually finish a story when I wrote it. And with Amazon being as ubiquitous as it is these days, and it's so much easier to get your work out there as a publisher. So I've been self-publishing since, like I said, 2015. And every book I've put out so far, I've published on my own.
Oh, great. That's really great. Great accomplishment. So what got you into your genre of comic books, like you're on genre now? So what made you become start writing this actual stuff, actually reading it? What inspired that transition?
Well, the superheroes are my comic book influence. When I was in high school, I discovered a comic book called Witchblade. And the main character in that book was a New York City homicide cop who wound up coming into the possession of a mystical gauntlet called the Witchblade. And I liked the element of cop turned superhero. And that's where I first created Jill Andersen, who's the protagonist of the Bounty series. But instead of having a mystical gauntlet, she just decides, I'm not doing enough being a cop, so I need to go do something else. And she becomes a superhero on top of being a cop. And it's not something I had in mind when I first created it, but I'd be lying if I said current events didn't influence that series in a way. Because it'd be incredibly tone deaf to write a cop and not address what's going on in the real world. Simply from the standpoint of how would my character react if she found herself in situations like this. What if she was assigned a homicide case and it turns out the person who had been murdered had actually been murdered by her coworkers, and what was originally supposed to be a self-contained story in that regard, when I wrote Behind the Badge, the third book in the series, real world being what it is, I keep getting more and more inspirations, and it's a series that's probably going to look a lot different as books go on even further. I would like to sit here and tell you that the real world doesn't affect my books, particularly those books, but I feel like it would be irresponsible of me as a writer if I didn't let current events bleed into that.
That's really great, though. A lot of people are not afraid to talk about issues, but they're afraid to cross that line, because then readers may be like, oh, I have to I can't support this anymore. Everybody's confused though. But when you're reading, it's reality too. So what's been the feedback from your supporters and your readership?
From the people who are fans, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I understood when I wrote Behind the Badge, it was based on the Freddie Gray case in Baltimore. I understood when I wrote it, it was probably going to be my least popular book. I did lose a couple readers over it, which I understood going in. I probably would, but at the same time, especially when it comes to writing stuff like that, I can't let how people react to what I write affect what I write, because then what I write's not genuine. And if it's not genuine, people are going to know that. And then I lose credibility as a writer. And I would rather somebody simply not like my story than somebody read what I write and think, I know this isn't authentic to who you are and how you write. I would rather somebody just read it and just say, I didn't like this.
That's great. So what were some of the challenges you found like writing it? Because you're writing like it's like not fictional, but it's like a fictional tale. But like, what are some of the challenges you face to like compare like bringing the real world into your book?
Well, the biggest one is the main villain in the series. His name is David Greger. He's a multi-billionaire businessman. He's very shady. He's very corrupt. And when I wrote the first book, I wrote Bounty in 2014. And I remember giving it to my editor, and my editor gave me the notes on it. And she said specifically about the villain, I like him. I just don't know how well having him in line with Russia plays. Because, you know, Russia was a boogeyman from when I was a kid back in the 80s. But I told her that's partly why I chose that. And the other part was, at the time, the cultural boogeyman is radical Islam and Muslims and all that. I wanted to stay away from that. Because I felt like it's overdone, it's overplayed, it's cliche,
everybody
it's racist.
knows. So it's like, everybody knows, like, you know, like the small mindedness though, instead of like finding the truth about like other things too. It's like everybody goes to that one thing. So it's good you went to that, like you switched it up.
But what's funny is, you know, certain real life events happened in the intervening years, not the least of which 2016. Now, all of a sudden, writing a shady billionaire with ties to Russia isn't nearly as much fun as it used to be. And I'm kind of over it. I don't mind art mirroring life, just not that much. So the next book in the series that I'm writing right now, it's called Bitter End. It's not the end of the series, but it is the end of that particular villain, because writing him isn't a whole lot of fun anymore, and I really don't want him to overstay his welcome. I'd like to be able to take the series and Jill as a character in better directions going forward. But that's probably the biggest thing, realizing that real life is interfering too much with this, and certain aspects are not as fun to write as they used to be.
So when you're writing, what do you want people to take away from your books? I guess it depends on the book, and because from the series, it depends from book to book.
For the most part, yeah. If they're reading one of my series books, I guess the biggest thing I want them to take away is what you do in the world has a lot more bearing than what you are. Like, yeah, Jill's a cop, but I care far less about that than I do the things she does. What you do is more important than what you are. And in NOTNA, where I have an archaeology professor, his name is Dr. Jack Corbett, he's the next chosen one. He winds up wielding this mystical crystal called the Gem of NOTNA, and that winds up putting him in the middle of a centuries-old holy war between, they're really heaven and hell, but I don't call them that because I'm not trying to piss off any fundamentalists. And the big takeaway from that book is you can be the most ordinary person in the world and you can still make an impact. So those are the big takeaways that I have that I want people to take away when they read my work.
Yeah, that's really deep though, because like a lot of people may not even like think that when like you're reading the book, they may like may not realize it until the end, like, a couple years later after they read it too. So in terms of like what makes you unique though, I ask this a lot of authors and artists. They get like, I don't, without being like too humble, what makes you unique and separate you from like other authors out there?
fact that I embrace the genre aspects of my work. I feel like even with superheroes being as popular as they are these days, you know, with all the movies and the TV shows and everything, there's still a stigma around the comic book superhero, and I like embracing the comic book superhero. I like embracing. Um, I mentioned my book NOTNA. A lot of readers compare that to the TV show Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I embrace those comparisons. I embrace, because I love genre fiction. I think genre fiction is capable of allowing people to escape the real world while also teaching them lessons about the real world that other fiction can't teach. So whereas a lot of authors may run away from those aspects, I want to embrace them while at the same time bringing them in such a light that you may not have noticed before. A lot of people don't figure superhero plus murder mystery. You know, you're not sitting down to watch an episode of Law and Order expecting a superhero to show up.
Yeah, there you go.
But that's sort of what happens in my series, and the juxtaposition of two completely different genres and the way they still manage to work together. I think, and this is where self-publishing comes into play too, because I feel like a lot of big name traditional publishers won't touch a story like that because it's not familiar to them. It's not something they can easily sell in a prepackaged format. So self-publishing, you can push the envelope in terms of what kind of stories you tell and that sort of thing.
Okay. So what's like your process of writing? Do you have like a blank sheet? Do you brainstorm? Are you like a pantser? Like what's your like process like for you?
I'm a pantser who is slowly but surely learning the value of having something resembling an outline. I don't do complete detailed chapter by chapter breakdown outlines. The people who do those, more power to you, but it's not something I can do because it takes away the creativity of the writing process, which to me is the whole point and the whole fun of it is being creative. I like it when my characters do things I didn't expect, because if they're surprising me, chances are they're surprising my readers as well. But I have learned the value of at least having something resembling a roadmap going in. I'll write my first draft depending on how well I'm writing. It takes anywhere from a month to 3 months to write a draft. And then from there, I go through a multi-step editing process in which I'll let the thing sit for 2 weeks. I won't even look at it or touch it or anything. And then when I come back to it, and I'll say, okay, my first round of editing, all I'm worried about is spelling errors and typos and grammar. Then I'll let it sit for another 2 weeks. And then after those 2 weeks, then this round of editing, I'm working on plot holes, continuity errors, that sort of thing. What that does is it takes the editing process, which can be daunting and intimidating, and by breaking it down into small chunks like that, it's more manageable. And it makes the act of editing not something I have to do, but it's something I look forward to doing because I know I have a roadmap for what I want to do. And then after 2 or 3 rounds of my own editing, I'll bring in another editor, let them work on it. Always let another pair of eyes look at your work. I know a lot of editors are expensive. There are things you can do to get around that, but always have somebody else look at your work. And when the editor is looking at my work, that's the time I can do stuff like work on a cover, work on writing the blurb that goes on the back, start working on my pre-order process and things like that. So if all goes well, that entire process from initial idea to hit publish, anywhere from 6 to 8 months. That's if everything goes well.
And in terms of editors, do you have a set editor, or do you have different editors depending on the book?
I have an editor for just my series because part of what they do is developmental editing, and I need someone who has read that series before.
Mm.
So they can spot continuity errors, inconsistencies, things like that. Whereas if I'm getting a new editor for each book, I'm missing that streamlined process. For anything that's outside of that, I've got different people that I'll look at. I've got a couple that I'll go to, but I'm always on the lookout for other editors, people who are looking for work, especially right now
Yeah.
with everything that's going on. A lot of people are having trouble paying bills or whatever. So if I can find somebody who's doing freelance work and I can give them some work to do, I'm still in a pretty good spot myself where I'm able to afford stuff like that. So if I can help somebody out right now doing that, I like to do that.
So let's talk about it a little more. In terms of like branding and promoting yourself too on social media, how do you use that too to like your advantage?
Once I figure it out, I'll let you know. Part of the problem is I mentioned earlier in the interview how easy it is to self-publish these days. The flip side of that is because it's so easy, there's so many people doing it.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of all the great books I've read in the last 5 years have been self-published books. I think self-publishing has really made the storytelling landscape a lot more creative, a lot more accessible. I don't buy the theory that a self-published book is worse than a traditionally published book. 9 times out of 10, they're just on par, if not better, because there's so much more work that goes into self-publishing a book from an author standpoint that if we're to the point where we're publishing it ourselves, then it's something we really care about. And since we care about it, we're going to work harder on it. So I don't buy the criticism that self-publishing is lesser. It is a crowded landscape. It does sometimes feel like you're shouting into the abyss. Part of it is knowing who you want your audience to be beforehand. If you know the sort of thing you're writing, I mentioned earlier, NOTNA gets compared a lot to Buffy and Supernatural. Well, if it's compared to those two shows, people who like those two shows will probably like this book. So if I tailor it to them and not necessarily romance readers, I stand a better shot in theory. There is, I mentioned shouting into the abyss, especially on Twitter. Your voice gets drowned out very easily. One thing I wish I knew when I first started that I know now is to build an audience before you hit publish. I did not do that. So here I am 6 or 7 books in, and I'm still trying to build an audience portion of what it means to be an independent author. If that was something that I knew to begin before I published my first book, I'd probably be in a little better position. And part of the problem is what worked 6 months ago may not work now. So you got to keep up with what trends work in terms of marketing, what trends don't, and keep an eye out for what's coming down the road. And that's not always easy to do.
That's great. So, what was your thoughts when you first sold your first book and gained traction? Because I know you said you struggled with like promoting yourself, but like, what was that first feeling like?
The first time I sold a book to somebody who didn't already know me, it felt like, okay, I've made it. I've succeeded. Anything beyond this is, I would like to be able to make a living writing these books. I'm not there yet, but every time somebody buys a book, it's a euphoric feeling, because the amount of work and effort and how much of yourself you put into these books, for somebody else to decide they want to spend their hard-earned money on that, especially these days, that's a good feeling. April was probably one of my best months sales-wise in years. I sold triple-digit books that month.
Wow.
I had a book launch, which helped, but I think since April was just the start of everything really being shut down, a lot of people being stuck at home, nothing to do, a lot of people turned to books. that sort of waned a bit, but if anyone is willing to spend money on something I wrote, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's always great. So in this time of like quarantine, though, has it affected your creativity? Part one,
Um,
and then part two. What's like some of your present goals?
I'd love to say that with more time, I've been really hacking away at the keyboard, but I haven't. I have my days where the words come easily. I have days where I struggle to put even a sentence on the page, and then I've had a lot of days where I just don't write anything. It's a lot like it was before everything went all to hell, to be honest with you. Part of it is I do still have a day job. It looks a lot different now than it did. Um, it's not easy. It's really interesting to be working in college athletics where there are no college athletics
Yeah,
going
it's
on.
crazy. Like,
But it is still a full-time job. I am still expected to produce at that full-time job. And there are some days where it's still an incredibly busy time, even when working from home. So um, it's not like COVID-19 has given me carte blanche to just write 24/7.
yeah,
And even the days when I have that sort of time, it's touch and go.
mm,
What I wish other creatives understood, and I see this on social media a lot.
mm-hmm.
People beating themselves up because they have all this
Yeah,
time to create, but they're not creating. The fact of the matter is, we're all stressed out right now.
yep, that's it.
People who don't have jobs don't know how they're going to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who do have jobs wonder, are we still going to have
Yeah,
jobs?
every day. So.
And if we don't, what are we going to do then? Um, I don't, I don't, A, I don't want to get sick. B, I don't want to get my family sick.
Yeah.
So there's stress then out there, and being cooped up in the house all the time for the last several months. I've only left the house to either go to my office or go to the grocery store.
Mm.
That's pretty much about it.
Yeah.
Other than that, these four walls have been it.
Mm.
So I want everybody to be easy on go easy
Mm.
on yourself right now. If you're too stressed to create, that's the world we're in right now.
Mm. Yeah, we got to remember we're human too at the same time, even
Yeah.
though we're creatives too, we have all this time. So even if we're like working part time and all that, so we need to stick our like minds off like stuff and just like veg chat, watch like a show or something like that, or like eat your favorite
Yeah.
food, you know?
Yeah.
So in
And
terms,
you can burn out
mm,
from your hobby just as easily as you
yeah,
can burn out from your job.
balance, that's it. So
Yep.
in terms of your audience, so you said you really don't know your audience like yet, still figuring out who do you want to be your audience? Like if you could like predict like demographic wise, like age wise, like gender wise, and like genre wise, like the fictional comic world.
Anybody who well, honestly, in a perfect world, my audience would be whoever just loves good stories.
Mm.
Um, with my series being with superheroes and all that, there's, I can go after the comic book element, which some of my best in-person sales have come from comic book conventions. Even though my work isn't a comic book, it's a book. People who love contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy, um, and part of it also is as I develop as a writer, I start writing different kinds of stories, and I start branching out outside of those genres that I'm already in, and that has the potential to pull in more people. I do have people who will read what I write no matter what it is, but the vast majority of my readers are readers for a specific thing. Not everyone who reads Bounty also likes NOTNA. I've got some people who will only read one or the other, and then I've got some people who will read both, and there's a lot of people who haven't read either. So
Yeah.
it's trying to maintain the balancing act of keeping the people who are already in the tent happy, while also inviting more people into the tent.
Mm. So, being an experienced writer, having published 6 or 7 books, what is some advice you have for younger authors out there and those struggling out there?
The more you write, the more you read.
Mm.
Those are the two things. If anybody wants to know how to be a good writer. I'm going to save everybody a bunch of money right now. You don't have to buy all of these books on writing. You don't have to buy Stephen King's On Writing. You could. It's not a bad book.
Yeah.
But there's two things you need to do. Read and write. Write, because this is one of those things where you have to do it to get better at it. Sitting on your butt in front of the TV screen isn't going to help you improve as a writer. It may inspire you to write a story, depending on what you're watching, but to actually improve on the craft of writing, you have to actually sit down and write. That's where reading comes in as well. The more you read, the better a writer you will become. Don't just read stuff that's similar to what you write either. You can read within your own genre, read outside your genre, read nonfiction, read magazines, read newspapers. Yes, those still exist. The more you read, the more different writing styles you expose yourself to, you will better inform your vocabulary. You will better inform what it means to have a different writing style. It may confirm that whatever style you write in is what you want. You may find something else you like to do. You could write third person past tense, read a book written in first person present tense and go, that was really good. Let me try to write first person present tense. Or, you read something nonfiction and it could click something in your head, and next thing you know, you got your next great story idea. I forget the guy's name, but he read a book about Alexander Hamilton, and next thing you know, there's a great giant Broadway musical.
Yep, there you go.
About Alexander Hamilton, which musicals aren't my thing, but I watched it the other night. It was really, really good. And while I probably will never write anything even remotely political from that sense, even someone like me can find something creatively viable in something like that. So read, write, don't pigeonhole yourself just to whatever it is you write. Branch out, because you'll become a more well-rounded person for it, and you'll become a better, more well-rounded creator because of it.
That's great advice. Because a lot of times creators like box themselves in. Because I know, like, we thinking like self-publishing too, you have to like certain genre. You can't like, I can't like learn about certain thing. It may distract me too, but it can actually help you. You never know. So let's talk about your next project you're working on too. Not to give too much away, but give us like a snippet of what's coming up next.
As I mentioned, I'm writing book 6 in the Jill Andersen series. It'll be called Bitter End. It's going to be the end of the current villain, David Gregor. It is not the end of the series. That series is going to have at least 10 books. I've got all kinds of storylines set up for that. And Jill Andersen, she's not the first character I ever created, but she's the first character whose story I published. So she's a huge part of who I am as a writer. So if I can get that series to go on forever, I'll let that series go on forever. But the idea is to have Bitter End out and ready by the end of 2020. All things going well, I hope.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And I'm also writing a script for a bounty graphic novel. Cool. I don't have a release date on that, because that's going to involve writing and drawing. And I'm not sure how that's going to quite go yet. But comic books are why I'm here the way I am today. So I wanted to bring Jill back to the comic book medium. So if I can have the draft for that written by the end of the year, that'll be great as well.
Okay. So what are some of the things you want to expand on and learn about? Aside from like writing, it could be about writing, it could be about life, it could be about like marketing, it could be about anything.
That's a good question.
You give me two things, no pressure. Or one thing.
I'd like to be able to... You really stumped me on this one. I don't...
Yeah, that's a stumper. That's my stumper right there.
I get so bogged down in the weeds of what I do. I sometimes don't take a step back and look at the entire landscape of it. I'd like to write a story about auto racing. Because next to writing, that's my big interest in life.
So you're big on NASCAR fan or Indy more?
All of it. If it's got four wheels and a motor, I'm probably watching it.
Yeah, I love that. F1 best probably. F1 is underrated.
F1's not one of my favorites, but I'll watch it.
Yeah.
If the race is on and I'm up, I'll watch it. It's honestly one of those things. A lot of people are wondering why I haven't written that already, and I just haven't had the story idea for it yet. But it is something I'd like to write someday, because it just makes all the sense in the world for me to take my biggest interest outside of writing and write something about it. So whether it winds up being a fiction story or a nonfiction book or whatever, I don't know, but I would like to write something about that someday.
That's great. So I'd like to end this with like a positive message from you to the audience out there in the world. Anything like to share?
Don't be afraid to get lost in stories, and don't be afraid to learn something from them. Yeah, the world is not a great place right now for a multitude of reasons, the vast majority of which you and I have no control over. Stories can be your refuge. Stories can be the inspiration to get you out of these tough times. Stories can be the inspiration to lead you to make these times better. Embrace stories, whether you write them, whether you read them, or what. Because art is not only the reflection of the world we live in, it's a roadmap for our way out. But only if we let it.
This has been great. So just drop your tags, your website, and Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that, so people can find you and follow you.
My website is jd.cuneganbooks.com. That's JDCUNEGAN books.com. From there, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter. I'm on Twitter at JD_Cunegan. I'm on Instagram at J.D.Cunegan All of my work is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble's Nook device, Kobo, Apple iBooks. You can buy my work in paperback from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you can buy them directly from me. I also do art commissions, book reviews, and I'm a freelance editor. You can find that all on my website.
Great. So, JD, thank you for coming on and sharing your story. It was awesome. I appreciate you coming on and sharing. It was awesome. So, thank you.
No problem, Justin. Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys for watching the Countless Vlogcast episode 44.